This is Show Up as a Leader, a show from People Forward Network, helping you maximize your positive impact on the world by becoming your best, fully authentic self.
Hey everyone, it's Rosie. This conversation you are going to love, I think. I am talking about my conversation with the amazing Nick Jonsson. He is the world's #1 thought leader on executive loneliness, and he has been featured anywhere you can imagine. He is globally recognized, and he has an incredible journey that includes both achievement and adversity. And we have such a authentic, transparent conversation about his journey and why he got so passionate about executive loneliness. And I will say this is not just for executives, because what he learned from executive loneliness translates down to any level of leadership and, quite frankly, any person. And so there's a lot of universal application in this conversation. And we know that loneliness right now is an epidemic, at least for sure in the US, but elsewhere, because again, Nick is globally. And just really, really good information and things to think about for ourselves. He talks about 5 steps to overcoming loneliness and what do we do and what are things we can do. And he's got an incredible book called Executive Loneliness that you're going to want to check out. And just a lot of humanness, a lot of richness, a lot of really good insights to think about. And for those of you that are listening who have a formal leadership role, when that head trash comes in, that somehow you have to have it all together or that you feel like you're alone or the saying it's lonely at the top, you definitely want to rethink that from his book and from this conversation. And for those of you that are listening who are not in a formal leadership role, but find yourself either putting leaders on a pedestal or really harshly judging them, maybe listen to this and think about they're a human inside of that role, and maybe you might see them a little bit differently. Just a lot of richness. I would love to know what you're taking away from this conversation. Take a listen. Well, Nick, I am super excited to have this conversation with you for multiple reasons. It's always fun when we have people on the other side of the globe having conversations. But also, I love the work that you're doing. And although you focus specifically on executive loneliness, as you know, I dug in further. I mean, it's so universally applicable to people in general. And so I just want to say for everyone listening, whether you are an executive, whether you aspire to be an executive, or are an executive at heart, like you might be the CEO of your own life, there's a lot, I think, in this conversation that is just human universal principles that we need to be thinking about. So I just want to start with that for everyone who's listening to shape the conversation. But the second thing that I just want to say, Nick, is that, like you, I work with a lot of executives. I work with a lot of CEOs, and it's lonely at the top. It really, truly is. And I think the amount of pressure that people are under in those roles that people just don't understand, the amount of crap that they get, both of us being business owners, there's just a lot of stress and pressure that people don't see and they don't realize. And so I just think that this is such a great conversation. So with all that as background, let's just dive in. Talk to me about why you're so passionate about this, because you have an incredible story that I just think is so amazingly human and awesome and feeds the conversation we're going to have and the wonderful work you do.
Wonderful. Thank you for that warm introduction, Rosie, and it's a pleasure to be with you on the show. So why did I dig into this topic? Well, let's just go straight to it here. I had my own battles. I had my own challenges, everything from isolation in the workplace, burnout, dealing with addiction, resigning from a job, and then leading to basically a divorce and gaining a lot of weight and being extremely unhealthy. And all of those things happened to me. Then I did recover from it and I came out of it. And then as I was in my new world, you can say, in my recovered world, I was thinking about what happened to me, and I became more and more curious to see if there was others that went through it. And with that, the idea was born to start doing more research and so on. And as I was in that space, I also lost a friend of mine to suicide, an executive who was working in Singapore, and that basically cemented my commitment to the cause then of fighting this.
I love it. I don't love that you went through all that, but I love that going through all the challenges that you went through, you're like, hey, I want to dig into this more and I want to see, what I can do about it. And so let's talk a little bit then about how pervasive it is, because I know beyond just executive, if you look at the research on loneliness, I mean, we know that we are a social species. We are neurobiologically hardwired to be in connection with other people. And we also know, at least in the US, there are just tremendous stats of a loneliness epidemic, and particularly with our youth that are coming into the workforce. And it's just way more than we think. And there's some research that shows that, loneliness is a greater health risk than smoking and other things. So there's a lot of data behind this. Talk to me about what you learned around executive loneliness as you started to dig into this.
Yeah, so in my case, my fall started with loneliness. My fall started with isolation. And I can remember the case clearly. I was working then managing hospitals and clinics, or working in the medical industry, being surrounded by doctors, having these conversations day in, day out. And of course, we did blood tests and so on, and my results were good. But you cannot really see if someone is going through a mental struggle on your blood test. And at that time, we were pitching for a big project. And I remember it really clearly as I'm sharing the story, because I was getting some insecurities. I was basically the lead. I was confident with the client and I was leading this project. But behind the scene, there were Excel sheets, there was formula. And I just had that kind of feeling that something is not right here. Maybe there's something wrong here. Maybe I made a mistake. But I didn't feel safe enough to open up. I didn't go in and talk to my boss asking for help. I didn't express myself because I felt that, maybe I'll be judged or this will be held against me if I'm opening up. I should show that I'm confident and that I can do the job. The issue with that is that I start to become more and more anxious. I even start to have panic attacks, worrying that maybe the project we delivered had some mistakes in it. They're going to catch me. And anytime then when the phone rang, or when I got an email from my boss, I was certain that in that email would be my termination. Or when they asked me into the office for a meeting, I was sure that they found out that I made some mistakes. And that played in my head for about a year. And during that period, then I withdraw more and more, isolated myself more and more, until I thought it's better I take charge of the situation and resign from this job, which is what I did. So that's basically how this all started. And I hear it over and over in leaders that and it doesn't have to be an executive at the top, it can be anyone in an organization. It's something small like that when we don't discuss it, then you start to isolate yourself, and then the rest is history.
It is interesting how common it is. And I know you talk about this in your work. I mean, really what you're describing, whether it is perceived or real, is a lack of psychological safety, feeling like somehow you can't speak up and say you made a mistake, or that you're going to get fired, or you're going to get judged. And so then what happens is we end up with what Amy Edmondson refers to as dangerous silence. We just start withdrawing, withholding, but also don't speak up. And then that has consequences, right? Because especially in healthcare, but I mean, you can pick any field. If there's a mix up in a calculation or whatever, I mean, in healthcare, it can be literally life or death for people. But, you think about all kinds of consequences if things aren't right. And if we can't catch it, and if there's a fear of retaliation or punishment, if we do speak up, then you're not getting good ideas. You're not catching concerns early until they become a massive disaster. And so I'm curious, in your case, was it more internal? Because we can also be our own worst enemy and just like, ooh, I don't want to be found out in this, I call it our head trash. Or was it that the environment wasn't conducive to speaking up? Or do you think it was a little bit of both?
I would say that the culture was very much so that you don't speak up. It was a lot of backstabbing going on. I saw people basically ending up in trouble for being vulnerable and to be asking for help and opening up. And it was almost like it was two camps in the office, and you take a side of this, and you got to show that you can deliver. Those were the people who then got the promotions. And even despite this, I was given a mentor, someone who was ahead of me in the game, but I wasn't even certain that I could open up to him about my challenges. Instead, I used those mentoring calls to impress him and show how good I was, so that he would be the one to sign on my next bonus check and giving me the promotions instead. So I was just playing that game. And I say, looking back at my corporate career, it's almost like I elbowed my way all the way to the top. That was where I was going. And it meant that it was quite a lonely affair. And this story I hear from so many.
Well, yeah, it's the cutthroat and, everyone out for themselves a lot of times, for sure. And, the other thing that you said that I see a lot too is, you have leaders who don't want to be vulnerable. They don't want to lean into uncertainty, risk, or emotional exposure. They don't want to speak up and say they're struggling. They don't want to speak up and say they don't know the answer. They don't want to speak up and admit they made a mistake. Sometimes they even shy away from having difficult accountability conversations in an effective way. There's all kinds of things that show up when we don't lean into vulnerability, because we're trying to avoid that, because we're trying to look good and avoid looking bad. We're trying to have this appearance that we have it all together. But then what happens, to your point, is that internal narrative that we have starts to get louder and louder and louder. I see this all the time in my coaching. And so we're trying to unpack that and help them move beyond that head trash, because when it's running the show, it is amazing. They don't collaborate. They don't speak up. They wonder their value proposition. They walk into rooms either overcompensating and trying to pretend they're the smartest person in the room and hijack conversations and don't hold space for other people, or they withdraw and stay close to, a certain group of people, or anything in between. And so I'm curious from your experience, so not just in the research you did, but obviously since then you've shifted gears and you work with a lot of executives globally and do incredible work. What role do you see vulnerability playing? And I'm especially because in what I've experienced is different cultures have very different relationship with whether vulnerability is okay or not. And so I'm just curious what you experience, because you work in Singapore, you're in Sweden. Like, what do you see?
Yeah, I see a trend that the younger generation of leaders want to have a more open culture, and they are ready to be more vulnerable. It's the older generation which is struggling still, but I see that indeed we are trying our best, but they need help. The leaders perhaps who are, should we call them old school, they need our help, they need our support. Yes, on a one-on-one coaching environment where we can actually help them to unpack this so that they are ready to have the conversations. And then typically what I do is to do a workshop with them and the senior leadership team, where basically I come in and I share my story, my challenges, I share stories of other leaders, and we can discuss case studies of the same company scenario with a leader A who was not vulnerable, what happened, and when someone was vulnerable, what's the difference here? And we can, through conversation, making everyone understand the differences. And then typically I also encourage everyone to share something which no one in the office knows, something which is perhaps a secret or something that is deep on their chest. Something could be perhaps the most difficult moment of their life or something they've gone through. Because when we do that, once we start to be vulnerable and we start to share something with our colleagues, then they see us for the person we are, rather than someone who perhaps don't even look like they have a heart. They just come in and do a job. And once we start to see each other for who we are, then the whole culture basically shifts gradually. And I just want to add also, I have a very interesting example where I'm working with one client who have a day shift and a night shift, two different managing directors, same kind of job descriptions. And I'm working with a team who are running the day shift. And that managing director has been ready to go this path, opened up himself in front of all the staff. And we've done a few workshops on this, and the team are getting the support they need, and they are encouraged to speak up, while the other leader is not ready to go down that path. And we start to now see big differences in terms of engagement, in terms of staff turnover, and all these kind of important aspects of running a business. That is just a huge difference, night and day.
I love that you're even seeing that within a specific organization. You're not even just comparing two different ones. Let's talk a little bit about when you say the day shift leader, the managing director is opening up, because one of the things, and I will say I am with you in that, I will say like Gen X and older is typically who I find struggle more, but not necessarily, because I even find younger people can struggle, especially if there's not psych safety or it was ingrained in them to not show weakness, but definitely do see a divide. But when I talk about vulnerability, initially, it is sometimes met with like, oh, I'm not doing that, or oh, I'm going to be weak, or whatever it might be. Or they think, what, you want me to like spill my deepest, darkest secrets, and you want me to start crying at work? And there's all this narrative, and I would say myths around what do we mean by being a vulnerable leader at work and creating that open, transparent environment. So talk to me about just even in your experience, whether it's that one client or whatnot, like how do you position it with them, and what are they doing that can maybe dispel any myths of vulnerability that people might have that are listening right now?
Yeah, you touch on something very important here, Rosie, because it's the key here is not to come in and share all your darkest secrets with the whole office and start opening up and being oversharing things. That's not what we want. We want people to just identify some safe spaces, some people who are safe to talk to. It can be perhaps one or two colleagues in the office. Maybe we can trust to go to our boss and ask for help when we are challenged, or go to HR, or maybe there's someone externally, someone in a similar position or a role in another company who we can have a safe conversation with, to be vulnerable and sharing what really matters. So it's about identifying the challenges we are facing and taking ownership for them. one part of the workshop which we go through is where basically all the senior leaders in a leadership team are asked to identify something that they could do with some more training, something that they think they can develop, and then explain about that. Can be anything from time management to maybe they want to be finance skills for non-finance people or whatever it is. Just that they take some ownership and are a little bit open with their weaknesses and the challenges and the blind spot in the workplace in front of their colleagues, so that we actually become human. And not everyone should be good at everything. We cannot be good at everything. So there's nothing wrong in having these conversations. But once we do this in a safe environment, in a workshop or training, then we can transfer that later across, and as we're creating a safe culture also in the company.
Yeah, what it reminds me of is one of the things that I talk about sometimes in the work we do with teams is giving yourself, I call it permission to be new at something. So, just like whenever you're introducing a new tool or you're trying to use something that's going to help refine a skill or help you level up. So whether it's around feedback or whether it's around fostering clarity and alignment or whatever it might be, what I experience is when I introduce it to some of my clients, they get like, oh, because they don't like being new, right? And so I tell them, I go, well, don't go back to your team and pretend you have it all together. Give them this handout and say, hey, I'm working on getting better at XYZ. So let's use this. Or, hey, this is a tool I got from my coach. Let's try it out. Like, let them be part of your process. Because if they know you're actively working to get better at fill in the blank, feedback, if they know you're actively working on being clearer, if that's one of your issues, they're going to give you a lot more grace while you're working through the bumps and bruises, because they appreciate your transparency. They appreciate you recognize your growth opportunities, and they appreciate that you're actively working on it and you're not being, covert about it or trying to pretend, because most people have a pretty good BS meter as far as I'm concerned. Like, they can see through it. And so I think it's really important, hey, I'm working on this, or hey, let's work at this, or this is a weakness of mine, especially at the executive level. This is what I always say to my clients is, I think that they underestimate the amount of weight that their words and their actions carry in every room they're in, whether it's physically or virtually, because of their position. Like it or not, when you're in that role, your presence carries a lot of weight. And many of them view themselves as like, well, no, I'm still like the intern, or I'm still whatever. And it's like, no, like how you show up matters because people are watching you.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I can remember, a company I worked in before the one where I resigned from, where I had my struggle, I remember very, very clearly, already in the job interview, they made me feel safe to talk about my strengths, but also my weaknesses. And they said, thank you for being upfront that you're not so familiar and you don't have, much experience in managing a P&L, and your finance skills are not perhaps what we need in this role. But I appreciate the good parts of you, is what they said. And let us therefore make sure that our regional CFO will work closely with you. In fact, we can have him to come and visit your office once a month in the beginning, so you can work this through together. So when that was clear already from the front, I felt safe. And if I felt that there was some struggles, if I had some issues, I could ask for help. That was clearly stated from the company. But in the company where I had my fall, it was nothing like that. It was all about just showing what we can do. And it was about numbers. It was about KPIs. And it was about showing how great you are. So again, it's a really A and B case where I can see just for myself the big difference. And I hear this from many leaders over and over, similar stories. And that's why I call the book Executive Loneliness, because I believe that this is all starting at the top. You can have a lonely and isolated culture. You can have open culture where psychological safety exists, and it starts at the top.
100%. And it breeds right through. It's funny as you talk about that. I think about two different healthcare organizations in same geographical area, but widely different. One where my experience is that, like, even when we were coaching leaders there, they're public institutions. So they would say, like, you'd have leaders that say, well, can you use my private email, because they're worried that someone will find out they're in coaching, or what it might mean. And you have, watching just how they operate. You have all these people that are posturing and trying to look good. And the information is so filtered by the time it gets to the CEO. And even the CEO is trying to look good. And it's just a bunch of like inauthentic, blah. That's the technical term, right? And then I have another organization that I've experienced where they're going through a lot of financial challenges and a lot of struggles, but they are so deeply committed to their culture and having tools that they can all lean on, and a common language that they can lean on, and very open about, what we need to level up our leaders. And it doesn't mean there's something wrong with them. We see that they need to get to the next level. And that's why we're investing in them, even though we're having financial challenges over there. It's not, oh, we're cutting off development and we're cutting off coaching because we're financially strained. We realize that now more than ever, perhaps we need to double down on our investment in this, because we're not going to get to where we want to go if we don't lead differently through it. And again, widely different cultures, widely different experiences. And it's amazing what you see in the engagement. And then you look at the KPIs and the KPIs follow. But when you focus on that, it doesn't work so well. So in your book, you talk about 5 steps to recovery, but really 5 steps to overcoming loneliness. So again, this is where I see it's super universal. It's not just for executives, but it is really critical. So walk us through, what are the 5 steps? Like, if anyone who's listening knows somebody who might be isolated or withdrawing or lonely, or you yourself are listening and you're like, I might be having a little bit of that loneliness and didn't know how to call it that or didn't have a name for it. Walk us through, how do we bounce back? How do we rise above that? How do we overcome it?
Yeah, so as I was writing my book, I was then just coming out of my own recovery, sort of, and I learned a lot, I have to say, from the 12-step programs. I took ownership for my challenges in my life. One of them was alcohol, and I had to seek help from it. So I ended up in one of these 12-step programs, and I learned so much from that. So afterwards, for the following year after that, as I shared my story, everyone basically asked me the question after, Nick, you sound like you were fortunate and lucky enough to have a drinking problem, so you got all that support. But if I'm not an alcoholic, or I don't have any drug issues or any other addiction problem, what should I do? And I kept getting that question. And that's why I thought I better frame this and include this framework then in the book for the people who perhaps don't have any addiction. But the first step is what I call in the book as taking stock, or basically taking a look of, where am I in my life? Are there some things that it's not serving me well? In my case, it was certainly a lack of exercise, overeating, alcohol, and I was completely withdrawn. Others, and especially if I do this workshop today for younger teams, once I shared my story and they feel safe to be vulnerable, many of the young leaders open up about them spending too much time on social media. Maybe they spend too much time in the evening, on TikTok or on some social media site, a time where they normally would spend reading a book, educating themselves and doing some relaxing activity. Others perhaps are binge watching movies on Netflix, and they just by, having this conversation and taking ownership for it and being honest about it, then we start having that awareness. So the first step, and I learned this from the 12-step program, is the taking stock or making an audit of ourselves.
I love that you broadened it, because as I'm listening to you, Nick, what always comes to mind, so I was fortunate enough to train with Brene Brown, and I'm one of her certified Dare to Lead facilitators. And one of the things she always talks about, when we're trying to avoid vulnerability, one of the places we can go, there's many places we can go, but a very common one is numbing. And she's very clear that yes, we can numb with substances, which is what we typically think of, but we can numb by aimless scrolling of social media. And then we have that dopamine addiction of likes or hits, or those, short little, like, our attention spans have dwindled. If you look at the research, because of these short clips on social media, we can numb by, binge watching stuff, because it's about avoiding feeling what we're feeling. It's a distraction and it's temporary, but then the loneliness doesn't go away. The head trash doesn't go away. It's a temporary way of not dealing with it. And it's kind of like, the more you don't deal with it, at some point it's going to burst. So I just appreciate the broadness of that, because people can think of, oh, maybe I do that. And I know, like, we've had a lot of stressful stuff going on in our lives, and there's some days that I'm just like, I can't do anything. And we did binge watch a show. I haven't done that in gajillion years, but I actually was like, you know what? That was actually what I needed. And now I'm going to deal with the suckiness of whatever. But I was like, I can't deal with it right now. I would say I numbed with intention, for whatever that's worth. But a lot of us, if it's a day in, day out thing, then we're avoiding dealing with whatever the heck it is. So I appreciate that first step of owning it, but also being really mindful of, oh, there's other ways we can numb besides substances that people probably don't think of. So what's step 2 then? So we own it, we figure out, and then what do we do?
Yeah, once we own it and we've written it down, we journaled on it, it's clear what it is, these are my challenges, then it's about to think, what is it that I can do to solve this? Is there someone who can help me here? Because most of the issues that we journal on, or most of the issues we identify, some human being in the world has been there before. Like in my case, I wasn't the first person who had an issue with alcohol. I wasn't the first person when I went through a difficult time to overeat and gain a lot of weight. And there was people who done this before. So why trying ourselves to reinvent the wheel when there's people out there who are happy to help? And I want to say this, that it doesn't have to cost a lot. People first think, oh, it's too expensive, I cannot, or I'm scared of asking for help. But what I found out was that for most of the issues we are facing, there's so many beautiful charities, so many volunteers, so many complementary hotlines who are there that we can call and get that first help at least. If we want to go the extra mile, yes, there are coaches, there's mentors, there's all these groups that are there to help. But a lot of it is complementary. Even the 12-step programs, they are basically complementary programs. And there's something for everyone these days. And if there's someone who's worried about the finances in these days, when many businesses perhaps go bankrupt or we lose our job and we worry for our finances, there's even now recovery programs, 12-step programs for businesses that go bankrupt, for people who are worried about the financials. So all that stigma about you sitting there with this challenge by yourself, too worried to talk to your husband or wife about it or talk to someone else about it, well, there are all these beautiful communities there. So think about, once you documented the issue and the challenge you have, who can you ask for help? And we can, of course, use any AI tools like ChatGPT these days very easily and get at least that first step, who you can talk to, and you can have a confidential conversation.
Again, I love how broad sweeping that is, because I think so often when we are struggling, when we are stuck, we can have that narrative of, well, I can't ask for help. It's going to look weak. People are going to judge me. People are going to think less of me. But if you look at the research on trust, our trust bank account, if you will, goes up dramatically when people admit mistakes and ask for help. It is one of the biggest trust builders, but it's counterintuitive to the head trash or the lies that we tell ourselves when we're in that space. The other thing that comes up for me as you share all that, Nick, is there is the reaching out and hopefully taking a first step. And for everyone listening, I've now had Jen Marr on my podcast twice. If you don't know her, Nick, I need to introduce you. But she does incredible work on actively showing and leveraging the skills of human care and support. And what she talks about is when we're deep in struggle, she uses the metaphor of a barbell, that one end of the barbell is formal help, right? It's counseling, it's employee assistance programs, it's all those things that are a critical part of the barbell, if you will. The other side is self-care, and both are really important. But she talks about when a person is deep in struggle, that barbell is really heavy for them to lift on their own, because the onus is on me to go do something to take care of myself, for me to reach out. And when you're in that space of deep struggle, sometimes it's overwhelming to know where to start, whatever. And so she talks about that as a peer, as a friend, as a leader, as a mentor, as anybody who cares about other human beings, that we can go to the center of that barbell and kind of lift up. And that's where supportive care lies. So it's one piece, it's not the only, where it's teaching people the skills of how do you recognize when someone else is struggling? Because every time we have a free moment, our faces are in our devices, right? So we've lost the ability to even see other people. So she talks about, how do we equip people? How do you see other people? How do you check in a meaningful way? How do you help people see they're not alone? So I just share that because if you two haven't been introduced, I think you need to be, because what you're talking about is, I'm like, yes, and if I can see someone going, but if you're so deep in struggle, or when someone says, let me know if you need anything, people are like, that's the worst thing you can say to me, because I have no idea even where to start, versus, hey, how is today? Hey, can I take this off your plate? So anyway, I think that it's so important, because we're not meant to go this alone. And so whether you are able to reach out and take that first step, which is critical, or you have somebody who helps take some of that burden off of you, it's about not being alone and about getting help, and that there's nothing wrong with getting help.
I love that, and I cannot wait for the introduction. I think we will have a beautiful conversation. And just to add one more thing here also, what I'm talking about a lot is that we should be proactive by establishing close connection and being vulnerable in the good times, so that we are ready for the challenging times. They're all going to hit us. And I can just mention a very quick example here. There's a man who joined my men's group 3 months ago because he was going through some difficult times financially and also in his marriage. But these 3 months in the group, he started to get the strength to open up. He took ownership for some parts. He was working on himself, and he was learning and becoming comfortable by sharing his challenges. As it sadly happened just 2 weeks ago, his mother unexpectedly sadly passed away. And the fact that he had already opened up a few months before, the fact that he was already on a path of speaking about his challenges, this helped him remarkably to go through this difficult period. It made him also even coming back in time, holding his mom's hand, and as she sadly passed away. It gave him the strength to reach out and have conversations, one with me, being in the men's group and sharing about it. It even gave him the strength to write a letter that he could read on the funeral. So these are, tools that can happen if we start to practice asking for help in the good times. So when the challenging times come, we are ready, and we naturally will be using those resources.
I love that. I love that so much. It's so important. All right. Step 3.
Yes. So the first thing that I did and that we need to do then is to get healthy. Get healthy meaning, our physical health, mental health, and social health. But really starting, and that's what I did. In my case, I gained so much weight. I was so unfit that for me, it was just getting out to start walking, just getting health back in my life. Because many times if we've been, isolated, if we've been burnout, or if we've been having some struggle, then perhaps we forgot about ourselves. So that was the third step for me, and that's the third step in the book.
Yeah, I always say self-care isn't selfish. And it's funny because as we're going through challenges with some health stuff in my family, I have wonderful friends that will reach out, and I'm like, the only thing I know how to do in times of stress is double down on my self-care of my lifting workouts, because there's something about cranking through a weight that's really heavy where you're like, oh, life sucks, but man, I feel like a badass right now. I can handle it. It's like I'm strong. I can get through it. Or, eating better, doubling down on sleep. I think it is the first thing to go out the window. But I know for me, I am not good for anybody. I'm not fit for human consumption if I'm lacking in my self-care. When that goes out the window, I feel even worse. It's like a tornado. It's awful. So I appreciate that. All right, what's the next step?
And then it's about nurturing healthy relationships. So now we are in a frame of mind. We are a little bit healthier. We are ready then to reach out also to others. But first, it's about the relationship with ourselves, really making sure that we have a good connection with ourselves. And in my case, also, it was a connection with a power greater than myself, spirituality. Spirituality tend to be part of the most recovery programs these days. Perhaps if we've gone through a difficult time, then maybe we neglected ourselves, we neglected others, and we have felt very isolated. But just to start identify that we are not alone, that there's something else out there, someone who we can hand over things to, also really, really can be something that is helping. And of course, we're also talking about meditation and being a bit more grounded in ourselves. So that's the fourth step, nurturing relationships.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you brought in meditation and whatnot, because there's so much good research. I am too, I cannot sit still long enough to meditate. I've tried it, but I find if I'm going for a walk or I'm in a workout, active meditation, that's where my brain's right? So I can't do the sit still and breathe. It just is not my jam. But there's so much research on having some sort of mindfulness practice and what that does to calm our nervous system, to calm our brain, to help us show up more proactively and intentionally rather than reacting to our life. And so I appreciate that, because I think that gets overlooked quite a bit of how do we quiet the outer noise and kind of have some way of coming back to ourselves and coming back to something to ground us. So grounding ourselves in our values, grounding ourselves in our faith. If people have a faith practice, grounding ourselves in something, I think is super, super critical, or we swirl. Love that. All right. What's step 5?
Yeah, then we are ready to identify our purpose. I think what I've seen in many leaders, and it doesn't have to be a senior executive or anyone from all walks of life, I should say, is about, finding your why. I love the quote of Mark Twain, who said that, the two most important days of our life are the day we are born and the day we find out why. So that's what it's about here. It's about looking for our why. And I would say that we have many purposes in our life. Someone might have a purpose in going to work and earning a salary for themselves and taking care of the family. That's beautiful. There's some purpose in that. But it's about looking for some other purposes, reconnecting with something that is a bit deeper in us, perhaps a cause or a charity that we want to support, and start working on our legacy and having those kind of meaningful conversations. And so that is indeed the fifth step and the last step of the book.
I love it. We use the Mark Twain quote a lot as well. And the metaphor that I use a lot around purpose and really our values is we call it a lighthouse. If you think about what a lighthouse does, it cuts through the fog. It gives you kind of clarity of direction of where to go, but also provides like groundedness, like, oh, okay. And so I think about like our purpose is like the beacon of light coming off of the lighthouse that's guiding us, but then the base that anchors it is our core values, right? And so we need to have both of those. And so I love that. I love it so much. We do a ton of that work because I have found if we're asking people to lean into vulnerability and we don't have a lighthouse, if you will, to ground us, if we don't have purpose and values that we're clear, then it's like we just are blowing any which way the wind goes versus having a way to go through more steady. And it doesn't mean things still aren't going to be hard, but we can go through it with kind of presence and groundedness rather than chaos. So we can find greater calm, I guess.
Yeah, we are fully aligned here indeed. And I'm actually working on my next book now, which will be the next chapter where the story will continue. And after then, the purpose, of course, is to create some goals that are aligned with it and then having the vision to achieve it. So hopefully we can have a follow-up on that with when the next one is out.
Oh, for sure, for sure, for sure. I love having follow-up guests. It's very fun. So with all that, I want to transition because you've obviously done a ton of work on yourself and you've helped so many executives and you're doing just incredible work around the world. And part of the work that we do, I have become obsessed over the last several years of normalizing the messiness of being human. And in my work, I just like you, I started seeing patterns in the organizations we work with and their leaders and their teams and the individual coaching and even interviews and stuff on this podcast. And I was like, God, it doesn't matter how much work someone does on themselves. It is part of our human condition to have these self-limiting stories that creep up from time to time and help us feel safe, but they keep us small. They keep us from growing. And so in the spirit of normalizing that messiness of being human, Nick, and I know you've done a ton of work on yourself, but I would love it if you would share what is a self-limiting story that you still tell yourself sometimes? And when it shows up, how do you move beyond it so that you can still show up as a leader in your life and have the impact you want to have?
Yeah, I love the question. And I would say that if I'm looking back at myself at university, I was working really hard. I was doing everything I could to get scholarship, topping classes and so on. And that didn't come lightly for me because I didn't even pass my high school. I had to come back as an adult to finish my high school. It was only age 22 I finished high school. I started university age 23, then being motivated and so on. But what drove me then at university was being this anxious overachiever, basically, someone who was working so hard to prove to himself and others that I could do the job. That mentality I brought with me also into the workplace and in the corporate world. This was what also fueled me, what made me work longer hours and putting in the extra work because I really, really wanted to do so well. And that can creep out still these days. So I have to be really mindful about it and thinking and linking it back to the purpose. Why am I doing this? Is it really making sense? So I spend the time on wise things and the things that really matters to me, because otherwise I could be off the wrong track.
Yeah, I love it. So one of the things that we, actually our next book is coming out. It's either going to be later this year or in the spring, but we took 5 years of leader data from coaching and also asking this question on the podcast. And I wanted to see what patterns that we saw. And we ended up identifying what we call 7 faulty programs, which are these universal. And so you just described the overachiever, that we actually call it the overachiever program to a T. And it's where our value proposition is warped and we think it's dependent on how much we get done, or we have to constantly achieve to prove our worthiness versus like we know we have worth by itself. And so it leads to us taking on more and more. And so I love that because part of the practice of upgrading that program is recognizing, wait, no, like asking yourself, am I doing this because it serves my purpose, or am I doing this because I'm trying to prove something to somebody else? And being really cognizant when that hardwiring kicks in. So anyway, congratulate yourself on being human. And I'm like, oh yeah, we got that's the overachiever program. I like to name it for people who are listening of, more examples of what these programs show up as. So, all right. Are you ready for quick questions?
All right, let's do it.
Okay. Fill in the blank. Living authentically is?
Peaceful.
Yeah, I love that. When the world is presenting an opening, but you don't feel like showing up as a leader, what do you do?
Asking my mentor for guidance.
Look at that, asking for help. I love it. What is something people would be surprised to know about you?
I was born on May 1, Labor Day, and I actually, as a child, I thought when they did all those parades and all the music and the firework on the Labor Day parades, I thought it was everyone celebrating my birthday.
I love that. That's amazing. All right. What's your favorite go-to movie?
Oh, wow. I can say I watched a fantastic movie last night, F1 with Brad Pitt. It's a great action movie. I would recommend it to anyone.
Nice. All right. What is your go-to song?
Oh, I love AC/DC Thunderstruck. It has a lot of energy.
Oh my God. That is my jam. When that comes on, I crank up my workouts to like another level. Thunder. I love it. Oh my God. All right. We can jam out to that. If we ever get to meet in person, we can jam out to Thunderstruck. Okay.
Yeah. Can't wait.
What is something you can't live without?
My bicycles.
Plural. You got many. Well, you do triathlons too. So there we go.
Yeah.
I did sprint triathlons back in the day. The longest one I ever did was Olympic, and I was like, I couldn't do the Ironman thing, but I was like, those were fun. What is something in your ordinary daily life that makes your heart happy?
Giving back, helping people who can never pay you back, actually.
I love that. I love that. And what are you grateful for right now?
Well, I'm really grateful to be on this show. And I should say that, I'm happy with all the invitations to be on shows in the US. And I'm coming over to US in April next year. So hopefully I can meet you and some of the guests in person.
Oh, that would be amazing. I love that. I love that. One closing question, Nick. I could talk to you for hours, but if you could challenge leaders everywhere to practice this one behavior that would create more human workplaces and equip everybody to show up as a leader, what would that be?
It would be to journal on some feelings. When we have that kind of feeling that we don't have the answer, when we are struggling and there's some pain there, something uncomfortable. Perhaps you wake up at 3 a.m. at night and you just have that feeling that something isn't right. And I recommend everyone to have some pen and paper next to the bed table and on your work desk and just journal, write that down. And then, as we shared today, as one of the steps in my book, think, who can I talk to about this?
I love that. I love that, right? It's like we are not alone. And there is something to be said about getting it out in writing, getting it out with another person, that we can kind of fact check the stories that are going on in our head rather than running with them. So such sage advice, Nick. I love the work you're doing. I love that you've turned adversity into something really positive and making a difference globally. And just thank you for you and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here.
I'm Rosie Ward, and this is Show Up as a Leader. To learn more, head over to peopleforwardnetwork.com and, of course, hit that follow button.